Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from Washington, D.C. Politics in this capital entered the surreal the minute that Donald J. Trump entered the White House. And just as Donald Trump pursued an insurgency to capture the grand old party on the right, so forces on the radical side of American politics are planning a counter-revolution. Today I speak to one of America's most renowned human rights activists and to a group of young people looking forward to changing the world.
First to your tweets for this week's show. We hear from X-Ray Vision, who says, just watched your interview with Chris Hedges on the show. Very interesting and enjoyable. Jim says, watch this episode. By comparison with other offerings, it was pretty good. Now, I don't know what you're comparing us to, Jim, but thank you very much for your kind comments. Ryan says, an absolutely fantastic interview with Chris Hedges on the state of modern America and how the left has been utterly suppressed in the USA's political system. As a Labour supporter, it makes my support of the Corbyn movement even stronger. Shirley says, the Schultz-Hedges interviews provided a balanced analysis of US politics present and future, even daring to air Obama negatives, never covered in Europe. As usual, Alex drew his own conclusions that gave food for thought. Pity not more widely screened in the UK. Well, I'm glad you watched the show on RT, Shirley, but of course, everyone can see it online too. And I'm glad you're enjoying the full and frank interviews. Finally, Donetta says, great show overall, well produced. Yes, I agree. And wonderful to hear Alex. Calming, refreshing, pleasant twist with happy, I think she means guests. In a world filled with hard-hitting fake news and defamation of character, people need more good sources. Kudos. Nice hearing guests speak openly and fully. Well, thanks for all your messages, and please do keep them coming in. You can tweet, email, or message us with any ideas for the show or people who you'd like to see us interview. Now back to Alex, who's in New York.
From Washington, D.C. in the capital to Times Square in New York City, here to meet a group of young people with some strong views on how this country should progress. Well, Jennifer, Chanel, Elizabeth, you're three young women of colour going through the college system in the United States and all of Dominican Republic descent, but you came to America in different ways. You first, Jennifer.
Well, I was born here, but my mother immigrated to America when she was about 21 years old, and my father immigrated to America as well, so that's how I'm here today.
Very similar to Jennifer. I was also born here, actually uptown Manhattan, and my father immigrated here at 17, I believe, to New Jersey, and my mother also immigrated here when she was about 17, 18.
And you're a slightly different way of coming to America.
Yes, I was born in the Dominican Republic. My grandparents have been living here since the 50s, but my parents lost custody of me and my siblings when I was 10, 11, and after that I had to live some time with my aunt in the Dominican Republic, and finally they were able to bring me to America when I was 16, 17, in the verge of 17, and I've been living here since then.
So one of the big campaigns on college campuses is, of course, the campaign for gun control, following the recent and very regular tragedies. Do you feel that this campaign, this new campaign, this resurgent campaign, has a chance of success whereas previous attempts have failed? What do you think, Jennifer?
I think that this campaign has been more successful than others in the sense that we were at least able to get, or not me at least, but at least the students in Florida, they were able to do a town hall in their hometown and were able to bring out their legislators and a representative from the NRA, and actually were able to put the people to confront their leaders and to get them to give answers. I feel that that's not something that was done before, and I do think that the students in this movement particularly have been very strong advocates and are getting legislators and the media's attention more than in the past.
Chanel?
I feel like one of the successes about this movement is that it is young people, and that we are showing that the next generation is going to take action. And so we're going to be the ones who are going to be able to vote in 2-3 years, and we're going to be the ones who are able to change the Republicans who are in office.
Social media has also been really impactful. The march on the 28th was all through social media, and it was really well organized. I know it happened in so many of the major cities, Washington, Boston. So I definitely think that it has been successful.
And how, what level is this? For example, a leap of imagination. Let's imagine I'm an advocate for the National Rifle Association. I say to you, you don't know what you're talking about, you young women. I mean, this is the Second Amendment right. I've got the right to bear arms. What would you say to somebody like that?
I wouldn't agree at all.
Polite.
Yes, I was going to say something that it's not appropriate. But I would definitely say that that's not the context of our time. When the Second Amendment was written, it was back in a time of where our people were the militia, and they needed every individual to be protected and to be able to like hold their bear their arms and protect themselves and protect their community and their people. But we don't live in that time anymore. There's no reason why 18, 19-year-olds should have access to an AR-15, which is a weapon used in war. It just makes no sense.
If you're in urban America, if you're in poor America, if you're people of colour in America, then you're much, much more likely to be a victim of gun violence than if you're not. Is that part of the issue that's being debated?
I think that's an incredible part of the issue. And I think for me, I've been blessed because I've had the opportunity to live in rural America and in urban America. I'm from New York City, but I have lived in Vermont as well. And Vermont is a very rural state, and people are crazy about their guns. So for 5 years of my life, I lived there, and I lived in a relatively safe community where gun violence is not an issue, despite the fact that many people had guns. However, I've also lived in the Bronx, and I lived currently in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is one of the cities in Massachusetts with the highest crime rates. And 2 years ago, my uncle was shot while he was working. And when I lived in the Bronx as a 5-year-old, my kindergarten school was right in front of my building where I lived. So I only had to cross the street to go to school. And one night, my mom, when she was coming home from work, she was assaulted with a gun, and they robbed her car from her. And this was right in front of my kindergarten school and right in front of my building. And I don't think that someone living in Bennington, Vermont has had, which is the town where I lived, I don't think they've had these same experiences as me. And I think that because they haven't had these experiences, they can say that gun violence is not an issue because it doesn't exist where they live, and that there are just these rare instances of mass shootings, because it's so much wider than mass shootings. And that's like my perspective on the issue.
Crime in New York City is at a 27-year low. So what's your experience? Do you feel safe? Have you had experience of hearing shots in the night, things like that? What do you think, Chanel?
Well, I grew up in Harlem. I do remember when I was young, I lived in a very populated kind of area in Harlem. So I do remember when I was young hearing a lot of outside noise, and especially sometimes it'd be like shot-like noises. And as a child, I didn't know if it was the last thing I would think was it was a gun, because I didn't want to put that in my head. So I always, kind of told myself, oh no, it's like something else or whatever. But it was something that was very disturbing. And just to have that memory of it and, understand that now people are actually going through this. I mean, this has been going on for a lot of years now, that gun violence is such a pressing issue for anybody, like the everyday person. It's scary to think that I was living in a situation where I either was coming in contact with it without knowing that people around me had it, or just hearing it at night.
I live in a part of the Bronx, Margaret Hills, where possession of firearms is very present. You can go to the park and see children, 17, 18 years old, with the guns. And growing up, my grandparents were always very protective, and they were always like, you can't go to the park, there might be some problem and you might be affected, you might be shot by mistake. Sounds of gunshots every night. In situations where you hear a shot, and my grandmother would close the windows, and I'm like, oh, don't look outside, you might get shot by mistake, because that has happened around my area. So it's very hard for me to hear people saying the rates are going down, but in reality, it's very present. You never know who owns a gun and who's gonna stop you to ask you a question, and you get in a heated conversation, and now all of a sudden they pull a gun out on you.
Let's talk about your reaction to the Donald. The president, as you say, is very savvy on and quite recently. I mean, this may surprise you, but I used to get letters from the president, which were usually delivered overnight with urgent marked on them, and often with things underlined and press cuttings enclosed to remind. This was before he opened his Twitter account. So he's gone from sending letters from America to Scotland marked urgent to be delivered overnight to being able to broadcast to the planet. What's the reaction to that?
I think it's scary. I think it's incredibly scary because of the amount of unfiltered information that he sends out to people. What our Vice President Mike Pence says about Donald Trump is that it is refreshing to be able to see what a president is thinking right as he is thinking it. But when your president is misinforming the people and what his thoughts are formed like based on information that is incorrect, I think that is scary. He has a lot of people, he misdirects a lot of people, and he has been disproven multiple times in things that he tweets out, and his followers, unfortunately, they don't care very much. So for me, this situation is, I would use scary to describe it, that this is the man who's in charge of our nuclear weapons.
But then isn't there something admirable about somebody who's prepared to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning to tell the world what he thinks about an issue, or what he's just seen on TV for that matter?
So I feel like at the end of the day, even if he does get, he tweets out ridiculous things, he's getting the attention that keeps him going and that keeps him at the top constantly. So
I do not like how he puts on information that's wrong. It just feels like he's not thinking properly as the leader of this nation. And that's scary. That's scary to know that your president is just not thinking properly about how he's using his words and how he's reaching out to the citizens.
You're free young women going through college, embarking on careers and hoping to see changes for the better. So what would your wishes be for the United States of America? What would be your top of your list in terms of hopes that you'd like to see as the years unfold?
Well, for me, I think my wish and my hope would be that my hard work would not be tarnished by my race and my gender. One of the things that hurt me the most about the past presidential election is that it proved, or at least to me it seemed, that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I busted my beep, beep, beep to get a scholarship to go to Brandeis University and to excel at my university and to apply and do more internships than the average and to have a higher GPA than the average student body, it might be possible that I might not be able to accomplish my dreams because I'm a woman and because I'm a woman of color. And that shattered me. And it still scares me to think that I may not be able to accomplish what I'm working so hard for because of things that are outside of my control. And I hope that that changes in America, and not only that race and gender doesn't matter for like achieving your dreams, but just I don't want to be scared for my loved ones just because they're of a certain complexion. I don't want to be having them walking down the street late at night, and I don't want to be worried that they're going to get shot or that a police officer is going to stop them and things are going to escalate because they thought that he had a gun or something, even if he had an iced tea in his hand. And then he felt threatened and then he was shot 8 times and then he's dead. So I think those are my dreams and my hopes for this country.
Janelle, what about you?
I always say to myself, and a lot of things that I've accomplished, I do credit it to where I come from. And I credit it to the fact that I do not believe that those are my boundaries. So I do wish in the future that those things such as race and gender and income and things like that are not going to act as boundaries for what we want to achieve.
Listen, you have a different experience. You've come to this country. You've got, yes. I mean, this is a process that many generations have gone through. So you must have great hopes invested in a
yes,
better
definitely.
life and a better society.
I agree with Jen. I really wish for like gender, race, and social class to not be boundaries for anyone. As somebody who's studying education studies and somebody who's an immigrant, I really feel that those have become like really set boundaries in our society where people are not accepted just because of the color of their skin or because they're a woman, and they feel like discriminated and they feel alienated from this country. They feel like they don't belong here, and that's really sad.
In my opinion, with young women like you three, the future of this republic is in pretty safe hands. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Medea Benjamin is the co-founder of the women-led peace group Code Pink and the co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange. She's been an advocate for social justice for more than 40 years. She's also been described as one of America's most committed fighters for human rights. Alex spoke to her recently in New York City.
Medea Benjamin, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Now, your activism has combined both the women's movement and the international peace movement for your co-founding of Code Pink, for example, including running for state office in California for the Green Party. But probably your most successful campaign when you took on Nike and, as some people say, brought it to its knees.
You know, it's interesting, Alex, in all the work I've done over the years as an activist, the easiest are going after companies that have brand names and have some kind of outlet, retail outlet. So we went after Nike for the way they were treating workers in China, Indonesia, Vietnam, toxic chemicals they were using in the factories. And you go outside a couple of Nike stores and make some ruckus and they'll, let's meet. And so we managed to clean up a lot of problems in the factories.
You must have met many corporate PR men then.
Met many of them because I would go to the shareholder meetings to kind of get up there and create a bit of a ruckus there. And then we took on sweatshop companies for the way they were treating workers. And one other campaign was around Starbucks for not using fair trade coffee. And we started organizing protests outside Starbucks. Immediately they came and said, let's meet and let's talk. It's a lot easier to move those kind of corporations than it is trying to move government.
But that's interesting. I mean, you're saying that in a perverse sort of way, you know, capitalism is more easy to influence in a benign direction than the political process.
Well, the political process is part of capitalism, and it's part of the really corrupt part of capitalism, where the corporations are giving money to the politicians. You can get to the corporations, again, if they have a retail face to them, it's easier. But to get to the politicians is a lot harder.
Because some these major corporations are a lot harder to get at because they're not really into consumer-facing industries, like, for example, the military complex, or to use the eyes in her face, the phrase, the industrial military complex. They're pretty impenetrable, aren't they?
They're not only impenetrable, they, think of how perverse this is. They take our tax dollars, we give it to the Pentagon. It takes a massive amount of our money. The Pentagon gives the money to these corporations. The corporations then take a little bit of that money and give it back to the politicians. But they also put a lot of money into PR campaigns to show how wonderful they are. That's our tax dollars that they're taking to convince us how good they are when they're really just part of a big scam and making guaranteed profits, because, you know, these contracts are basically a guarantee win for them, what they call no-bid contracts, and then they profit from war, but yet people think of them as these wonderful, benign corporations.
So, Medea Benjamin, I mean, people watching this will think, well, you know, this is a lady who, acting with others, obviously, brought the mighty Nike to its knees in terms of wages and conditions for workers around the world, but is now saying that there is no effective way to campaign against the corporate military complex in the United States. Is that what you're saying?
And the key word there is effective, because I do a lot of campaigns and I find myself flailing around, hitting my head against the wall, yelling and screaming just because I feel so incensed.
Tell us about your latest book about Iran and your experiences there and how you found that society.
Well, I went to Iran a couple of times and I was actually blown away by the Iranian people, because, you know, even if you're a person who's very skeptical of the way the mainstream media talks about a place, there's still some part of it that you do feel internally the stereotyping. And you go to Iran and you find these incredibly well-educated people, and they love Americans. I mean, I'm sure they love Scots as well. They love Europeans, but Americans, they knew so much about the United States. Literally, like sitting down in a cafe and having a casual conversation with somebody next to you, become good friends because they're so anxious to learn more about you, invite you into their homes. And they're incredible business people. You know, in some ways, all of these sanctions over the years has forced them to find ways to replace all these imports.
And how much do you feel that the role of women is a key to political progress internationally?
Well, certainly I know women like Margaret Thatcher, who is not somebody I would put up on a pedestal as someone I admire their politics. Or in this country, we have former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who I wasn't very enamored with, and even Hillary Clinton I felt was very hawkish in the way that she looked at the world, and that she was going to be as tough as any guy. So there's no guarantee with women coming to power that you will have a softer, more nurturing society.
Well, Condoleezza Rice once told me over dinner that she actually felt as Secretary of State that she had to demonstrate that she was no pushover. I did observe her. I thought she'd probably demonstrated that pretty well.
She demonstrated that very much, and you might see one very famous picture from my group, Code Pink, where we were in front of Condoleezza Rice. Can I get close to you?
Of course.
And we were like this, with bloody hands, like this, saying, "You have blood on your hands."
Was that a demonstration or what?
In a congressional hearing where she was testifying, running up to her before we got arrested, and putting our hands right in her face to say, "You have blood on your hands," because she did have blood on her hands. So yes, there are plenty of...
And yet, interestingly enough, I mean, in that conversation,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Condoleezza Rice can speak for herself, but she was highly critical of the direction, as she saw it, the extreme direction of the Republican Party. So, you know, your demonstration with Condoleezza Rice, but in Republican terms, she might be regarded as something of a moderate these days.
Well, she's not a moderate in my eyes, and she's never come out afterwards and said the Iraq War was a terrible mistake, and we apologize to the Iraqi people, and we should give reparations to those people for all the damage that we have caused. I haven't
Is
heard
there
her
any
say that.
Republican you'd be comfortable with in the White House?
I don't really like the Republicans or the Democrats. I like people like Bernie Sanders, but he's such a rarity in the mainstream politics. That's why I ran as a Green Party. But so it's not the individuals, it's the system, Alex. And you know, the system is so corrupted by money. I mean, we talk about it with the military-industrial complex, but take any big industry, whether it's oil or pharmaceuticals, the drug industry, anyone. They all are giving money to the politicians to get something from those politicians, and it's just not a good system.
Now, you've mentioned a few tough-minded women who felt perhaps they had to act extra tough to succeed in a male-dominated world of politics. How about the women activists that you've aligned with and the women who are changing the whole system?
Well, yes, and I think if you have a even majority of women that are in politics, the politics would be better than it is now. If you had more women that are making decisions in general, I think the decisions would be better. If you have more women in the State Department, I think there would be more use of diplomacy.
Now, among the many accolades and awards you've received for your career, you're one of the recipients of the Martin Luther King Jr. Peace Prize. Now, in the 50th anniversary of his death, has a special resonance for you?
I think of the triplets that he talked about, of the triple ills of poverty and racism and militarism. So we have not progressed all that much in the last 50 years in a way that Martin Luther King would have wanted. So to be a recipient of his prize, I don't feel that I have done nearly enough to make his dream a little closer to reality.
And why isn't there a great rallying figure of radical America like Martin Luther King was in the 1960s? Well, why isn't that figure emerging to lead an army that's waiting to be led?
I think Bernie Sanders did it during his campaign. I was actually shocked. I was one of the people as part of a group called Progressive Democrats of America. I'm a Green and a Progressive Democrat that pushed for Bernie Sanders to run. I thought he would do sort of the way Ralph Nader had done in his presidential runs, maybe 2 to 3%. If he did really well, he'd get 5%. I was blown away by how well Bernie Sanders did. You know, this is a very conservative society in the United States. The center in the US is the far right in many other places in the world. And Bernie Sanders calling himself a socialist, I said he'd never get anywhere using that term. And lo and behold, among young people, they adore him. A poll that was done at the time showed that for the younger generation, they had a more positive view of socialism than they did of capitalism. Of course, it also said in the poll they had no idea what socialism was. But I think it's very remarkable the way Bernie Sanders has ignited a generation.
Well, Medea Benjamin, what would be your hopes for America? If I was to give you 3 wishes for America, what would they be?
I wish that we would gently ease out of being an empire and just be a nice, democratic nation that learned to live at peace with our neighbors around the world, not trying to dominate them. I'd wish that the race issues could be resolved in an equitable way in the U.S., which I think means serious reparations for what was done around slavery. I also think in that same vein, reparations around what we did to build our country on the genocide of Native Americans that has never been, we've never been held to account for.
Well, I hope I can't actually make your wishes come true, but what I can do is give you the quaich, which is the Scots Gaelic for loving cup. Now the drill's quite simple. You put whiskey in the quaich, only Scotch of course, and then you pass it around your close friends.
Well, that is wonderful and beautiful, and I think passing things around among friends is the kind of world that I really do want to live in, so this is a perfect gift. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
Now, wise people know this is not a country, but a continent. So just because you meet political activists in Washington or idealistic young people here in New York City, doesn't mean that their words and their thought will catch much ice in the vast hinterland of this country, where Trumpian philosophy is still gospel and Donald's still the king. But when you think about the last time a movement for political and social change swept the United States in the 60s and 70s, then these grandparents of the young people I met today didn't have the access to the social media to organize and to agitate. And therefore, I'm not so sure that the next political insurrection in this country won't come from the right like Trump, but from the left, because perhaps the times they are a-changing again.